When the millionaire mistook a stranger for a robbery, what happened next will shock you. The night was thick with storm clouds, the kind that wraps around the town like a shroud, hiding the harsh reality beneath. Up high in his penthouse, Charles Winters, the $10 million man, sat by the massive window with a glass of bourbon trembling in his hand. Outside, the sky flashed with fierce lightning, illuminating the city below a fortress of shimmering glass and steel. But inside, it felt like a scene out of a horror film. Just as darkness closed in, a loud crash shattered the quiet. Startled, Charles gripped the glass tighter, feeling the cool, smooth surface slice into his palm. His heart raced. He peered into the shadows. Was it a burglar? Anxiety coiling in his chest, he moved closer to the sound, each step crunching against the shattered glass of the window frame. Outside, drenched in rain, a figure loomed near the alley, drenched yet determined, a silhouette against the flickering streetlight. It was a young man, soaked to the bone, staring up at him, his face a mixture of panic and pleading. Would-be thieves didn't typically beg to be seen. Charles sucked in a breath, the lump in his throat swelling. This didn't feel right. Fear slithered down his spine. What if he was part of a bigger plot, luring him into a trap? As he reached for his phone, a phone meant for emergencies only, it slipped from his fingers, tumbling to the floor in a cascading thud. His pulse quickened. The stranger, catching sight of the phone's glow, made a sudden movement, and that S when it hit Charles, maybe he was just a lost kid seeking sanctuary. Yet, the image of a masked burglar invaded his mind like an invasive weed. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. His eyes darted back to the figure, who had now moved, inching closer, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Charles's instincts screamed at him to bolt, but something deeper, something human, told him to stay. Who was he really? As the rain poured down and storm winds howled like angry spirits, the air between them crackled with tension. Then, just as Charles opened his mouth, ready to shout for help, the lights in the entire building flickered once, twice, and then darkness. It was swallowed whole. The unexpected silence screamed in his ears. What had he just stumbled into? What would he choose to believe in, the fear in his gut or a possible innocence? As he paused to listen, he felt the boy's breath against his face, each gasp a possible key to a mystery he couldn't yet grasp. And just then, a scream echoed outside, slicing through the suffocating silence, a cry that seemed to shout, "Run!" What lay ahead for him now, a choice between fortune and safety, was unknown. The pitch blackness felt alive, almost as if it were a breathing entity pressing in on Charles from all sides. In the silence that followed, he could hear his own heartbeat hammering in his chest, overpowering the distant rumble of thunder. Panic surged through him as he stepped backward, crashing into the glass-framed wall. Each breath felt like a labor, the air thickening like the coming storm. "Please, help!" The words cracked from the stranger's lips, bright and haunting in the dark. Charles felt a sting of humanity rising in him, even as caution pulled at his instincts. What was that urgency in the young man's voice? It hinted at something crucial, something more than just a plea for help. Lightning cut through the gloom again, revealing the boy's face, pale but warm with desperation. He looked no older than 20, his skin slick beneath the downpour, and a fading bruised mark marred his cheek. This wasn't a robber, but who was he? "Why are you here?" Charles called out, his voice wavering, mixing fear with curiosity. I was being chased," the boy stammered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting shadows to spill forth from the alley. "I had nowhere else to go." "Please, they're coming." Charles's mind raced. Chased by whom? He didn't know any gangsters or thugs. He was, after all, just a millionaire living in a coat of luxurious fabric woven from success. But still, why did it feel like he was handling a live grenade? A flicker of the emergency lights broke the dark like a fragile heartbeat, and just then, he caught a fleeting glimpse of movement outside the window. His breath hitched as figures rushed past the alley. They were dressed in dark clothing, faces obscured by the rain and shadows. It was as if they were sent from another realm, and without knowing why, dread coiled around his gut. "There!" The stranger pointed, abandoning all caution now. "We have to move. I don't want to die tonight." Charles hesitated, the weight of his own expensive life dragging him down. This was the moment risk it all and help a kid who might end up stealing from him, or keep his doors locked and his bourbon close. "Are you sure they're coming?" Charles swiveled to the boy, desperate for clarity as the shadows began to loom larger. But before he could decide, the emergency lights flickered again, casting a brief illumination over the boy and revealing something that twisted Charles's gut even further. The boy had a tattoo, an insignia he instantly recognized, a marker of a violent gang. His mind reeled. So, it was true the kid was in trouble, but he was entangled with the very darkness Charles had feared. It felt like standing at the edge of an abyss, the unknown stretching infinitely below. "Quick! We have to go," the boy urged, pulling at Charles's sleeve, urgency dragging him back to reality. The noisy chaos of the storm suddenly felt like an orchestra conductor snapping Charles out of his paralysis. Just as he started to move, the door behind him burst open with a loud crack. The world exploded with sound as figures poured in, shouting and demanding, their forms indistinct but threatening. Charles felt the heat of decision burning in him, a choice he had to make in an instant: flee with this stranger or lock himself in and hope for salvation. Then came the voice that turned the night cold, a low, familiar growl. "Find him. He can't escape tonight." What was happening? Against the chaos, Charles's thoughts tangled. He was no longer merely a man confronting a stranger, he was unwittingly stepping into a labyrinth of danger that threatened to swallow him whole. Before he could react, the boy jerked forward again. This way. Would he follow? Or would he let himself be consumed by the fear of a looming darkness? With his heart racing, he made a choice. But the real question loomed larger: would he regret it? Charles dashed forward, heart hammering as the boy yanked him into the shadows of the hallway. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked concrete mixed with something more sinister, an odor that sent shivers down his spine. Behind them, the thrumming of angry voices erupted like a war drum, commanding and relentless. "Keep going," the boy urged, urgency vibrating in every syllable. "We can't let them find us." "Who are they?" Charles gasped, trying to keep pace, but dread clawed at his throat. He felt like a marionette tangled in its own strings, caught between his comfortable life and the dark unknown. "Just bad people. Seriously, we don't have time." The boyish desperation painted every word with a sense of urgency. He pulled Charles deeper into the building, slipping through doors that seemed to creak ominously in protest. Each twist and turn plunged them into deeper darkness, illuminated only by sporadic flashes of lightning, casting eerie silhouettes against the damp walls. Stumbling, Charles tried to gather his thoughts, but every shred of reason spun wildly. Was it a mistake to trust this kid? He clenched his jaw, weighing his options as adrenaline coursed through him. "Wait!" The boy suddenly stopped, pressing his back against the cold wall and peering around the corner. The guttural curses and shouts echoed, and fear rippled through Charles. He felt the weight of reality crashing down. What had he involved himself in? "Get down!" the boy hissed, dragging Charles to his knees. They crouched low, barely breathing as the figures approached, their shadows looming closer. "Where the hell is he?" one of the ominous voices boomed. "Find him. He won't get away this time." The menace in those words seeped into Charles's bones, a chill that threatened to freeze him in place. He glanced at the boy, whose face was a mixture of resolve and terror. This was no ordinary situation, they were entrenched in a life-and-death game. "It's my fault," the boy whispered, eyes wide, shimmering with something Charles couldn't quite place. Was it guilt or fear? I thought I could get away, but they wouldn't let me go so easily." "Then why should I help you?" Charles shot back, desperation mingling with self-preservation. "You brought this to my doorstep." "I know. But if you leave me, they'll find you too. They've been watching everyone around me." Panic laced his voice. "Just trust me. If we don't move now, we're both dead." The thunder rumbled overhead as another flash of lightning illuminated their surroundings, revealing the boy's tattooed arm, and the fear etched into every feature. For the first time, Charles saw a flicker of vulnerability that resonated with something inside him. "All right," he finally said, voice steadying despite his trembling hands. "What's the plan?" The boy took a deep breath, eyes scanning the corridor. "We have to find a way out. There's a rooftop exit came in that way originally." Before they could make a move, the door beside them burst open. Two figures stumbled in, dripping with rain, their eyes wild and desperate. "Yes, this way," one yelled, lunging forward as if to seize the mysterious boy. Without thinking, Charles lunged, shoving the boy behind him. "Go! Now!" The boy hesitated just a second, but Charles's resolve ignited something deep within him. "Run!" As the kid darted down the narrow passage, darkness swallowing him whole, Charles was left facing the charging figures. The walls felt like they were closing in, and out of instinct, he took a step back, bracing himself for the impact. "Stop him!" one shouted, reaching towards Charles. In that electric moment, everything seemed to pause. Charles felt the grip of fate tightening around him, uncertain if he would manage to escape this chaos unscathed. Where had his life taken such a twisted turn? Footsteps echoed closer, and Charles's heart raced. He had a decision to make: stand and fight for a stranger or bolt into the night, leaving it all behind. And just then, beyond the door, a chilling voice called out, "There's nowhere left to hide. Surrender now." What would he choose? The shout echoed like a gunshot, reverberating in the confined space. Charles's mind raced as panic clawed at him. Every instinct screamed for him to run, to join the boy he'd just saved, or, more accurately, to save himself. But instead, he stood frozen, staring into the shadows where the charging figures loomed. "Move!" he urged himself, sensing the urgency of the situation crawling under his skin. He glanced over his shoulder, the passage dark and foreboding, but he couldn't see the boy. Had he made it to safety? The uncertainty twisted into his gut like a knife. Then, a sudden commotion broke loose as the men barreled towards him, their faces sharp in the flickering light. Rage and desperation twisted their features. One raised an arm, and a glint of metal caught Charles's eye, a weapon. His heart plummeted. There was no time left. He dashed down the corridor, feet pounding against the damp concrete as he darted deeper into the building. The thunder rolled like a battle cry outside, a fitting soundtrack to the chaos that encircled him. Charles risked a glance behind, his breath hitching. The men were hot on his heels. "Stop!" a voice barked. "You can't escape." Fear electrified his every nerve, but he pushed forward, the shadows swallowing him whole. Without a plan, he pivoted, veering into an adjoining hall, praying that it would lead him to the rooftop exit the boy mentioned. As he sprinted, the boy's face flashed in his mind, wild eyes, that tattooed arm promising a story deeper than mere survival. They were connected now, he could feel it. In an instant, Charles realized he couldn't abandon him. A sudden crash sounded behind him. One of the men must have stumbled. He quickened his pace, heart pounding. The adrenaline drained through his veins as moisture from the air clung to his skin. He skidded to a halt at a nearby window, the rain streaking down like tears. Outside, the chaotic street glimmered, lit by swirling headlights and distant sirens. But the way was blocked, a torrent of rain systemically washing away any chance of escape. Through the static of his thoughts, a distant cry entered his ears. It was muffled but unmistakable. The boy? Charles felt his chest tighten. He had to make a choice. "Come on!" he shouted against the clamor. "Where are you?" No answer. Only the relentless pounding of footsteps drew closer. Casting one more glance at the window, he saw movement on the rooftop across the street, a possible escape route. With a deep breath, Charles rolled up his sleeves and climbed onto the windowsill, drawing as much courage as he could muster. It was now or never. He propelled himself into the air, arms flailing for balance as he hit the slick rooftop of the adjacent building, slipping but catching himself at the last moment. "Charles!" The boy's voice rang out underneath him. "Where?" he shouted. "Over here." Charles turned, spotting the boy crouched next to an air duct. He lunged forward, and they both scrambled into the cramped space, the reek of metal and oil biting at their senses. Darkness enveloped them, but he could barely hear the thundering voices of the men on the street below. They searched, pacing aimlessly, their voices a low growl that sent chills down his spine. "Do you have any idea what you've gotten into?" the boy whispered, his tone all at once serious and fearful. Charles started, but before he could finish, the building shook with the force of a nearby explosion. Debris rained down just outside their duct, and they flinched in unison, the threat uncomfortably close. "Stay quiet," the boy urged, eyes wide. "They'll hear us." Dust filled the air, mixing with the adrenaline racing through Charles's veins. What had they stumbled into? The answers loomed just beyond the darkness. As they held their breath, a piercing whistle broke through the chaos. It seemed far away, yet it filled the air with tension that made Charles's insides twist. "Are they turning this whole place upside down for you?" He could hear the disbelief in the boy's words. Was his life truly worth such chaos? "What are we going to do?" Charles finally gasped. "We need to find out who they are," the boy replied, resolve hardening his voice as he looked deep into Charles's eyes. "And it starts now." The old duct vibrated as footsteps grew louder, inching their way towards them. With their fate hanging by a thread, the shadows of the men crept closer, and Charles felt that the answers they were looking for might just come at a price they weren't ready to pay. What secrets lay ahead, waiting for them in the darkness? The air was thick with anxiety, each echoing footstep pushing against Charles like a wave crashing onto the shore. He and the boy huddled together, the cramped space of the duct strangely comforting amid the chaos. The muffled voices below stirred fear, setting Charles's heart racing. He could almost feel the weight of the men's frustration seep through the very walls. "You know they're looking for someone," the boy whispered, pulling Charles's attention back. His eyes reflected a mixture of fear and determination. "But they don't know who we are yet. We can't panic. We need to listen." Charles nodded, even as his palms felt clammy against the metal. He thought of the tattooed arm and the wild eyes, how they had captured a spark of hope amid this frantic environment. That hope flickered now, struggling against the shadows creeping into their sanctuary. Another tremor shook the building, sending a ripple of dust cascading down like a rain of secrets. The voices below were growing more urgent, frustration leaking into their tone. "What if he slipped out?" one shouted. "He can't have gone far. Keep looking. We can't let him get away. He knows something." That last line sent chills racing down Charles's spine. What did he know? "Maybe it's about the money," the boy muttered, his voice strained. "Or something bigger." "They wouldn't be doing this for nothing bigger?" Charles whispered back. "What do you mean?" "No idea, but it's something they care about." "We can't stick around to find out," he replied, his brow furrowing as he eyed their dark surroundings. Charles felt a surge of responsibility press down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it felt like a reckoning they both had to face. He looked at the boy, who took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Okay," Charles said, shaking off the unease. "What's the plan?" The boy's face brightened, just a hair, like a small candle flickering against the storm. "We wait until they pass and then crawl to the next duct that leads to the stairwell." His voice held a tinge of uncertainty. "But what if they catch us?" "They won't," he insisted, confidence wrapping around his words like armor. "They're going to think we're still upstairs. It's a chaotic mess down there. Let us not give them a reason to check here." The footsteps below faded for a moment, and they exchanged nervous glances. "Now!" the boy hissed, barely allowing Charles a moment to gather himself before he urged him further down the duct. They crawled silently until they reached the branching pathway. A faint beam of light flickered in the distance, illuminating a small opening leading to the stairwell. "We're closer," Charles murmured, adrenaline coursing through him. Suddenly, the ground trembled once more, this time more violently. Papers fluttered like startled birds as slices of plaster fell like snowflakes. "They're throwing explosives." The boy yelled over the noise, gripping Charles's arm tightly. "Get moving." Charles didn't think twice. They scrambled toward the opening, heartbeats syncing with their frantic movements. As they squeezed through the hatch into the stairwell, the sounds of chaos exploded behind them. The men below were full-on shouting now, panic beginning to seep into their harsh commands. "He is escaping. Where did he go?" The boy slipped quickly, urging Charles forward, down the narrow stairwell. Charles's thoughts darted to the boy's conviction. He had to trust him now, follow his lead. They reached a landing, and suddenly, the boy halted, his eyes wide. "We can't just rush down. We have to make sure no one is waiting below. How do we even know if it's safe?" Charles countered, glancing nervously back towards the opening. The boy raised a hand to silence him. "Listen." Silence enveloped the hallway, a brief refuge from the pandemonium. But then, a door creaked at the bottom of the stairs, the unmistakable sound of heavy boots landing on concrete. "Oh no," Charles whispered, dread creeping back into his chest. "Now!" the boy shouted, and they bolted down the remaining steps, uncertainty tinged with hope. With every beat of their hearts echoing louder than the chaos, they raced toward the doorway that might lead to freedom, unaware of what lay on the other side. That door could be salvation or damnation. Would they step into light or plunge deeper into darkness? The answer was just a heartbeat away. The door swung open, a heavy metal barrier yielding to their desperate push. Charles stumbled into the hallway, the boy close at his heels. The air felt sweeter, cleaner, but the echoes of chaos still sat heavily in the background. A flickering fluorescent light told them they were still in the belly of the beast, but they had escaped the immediate grasp of their pursuers ahead. The corridor stretched like a long shadow, empty and haunting. It didn't feel safe, not yet. The boy scanned the area, his instinct was sharp, too sharp for his years. "We need to find a place to hide," he whispered urgently, eyes darting to an unlit side corridor branching off. Charles nodded, his heart still hammering against his chest. He followed the boy down the passage, fear wrapped tightly around them like a blanket. They stumbled into a dusty storage area teetering with forgotten boxes. Old furniture lay in a heap, shadows mingling. "Here." The boy pointed to a row of tall shelves stacked high with odds and ends. They ducked behind the shelves, their breaths shallow, listening. The din from the hallway echoed grotesquely, the voices amplifying every second into an unbearable long moment, but then they heard something else, a distant rumble deeper than anything they had encountered so far. It was a warning, a storm brewing within the building itself. "What now?" Charles muttered, trying to mask his panic. Just stay quiet," the boy replied, his gaze unflinching. "Maybe they'll pass us by." Yet as moments slipped by, an overwhelming sound swept through the air. Something was happening, something big. The lights flickered, and dust rained down as reverberations shook the floor beneath them. Instinct flared in Charles's chest, and he peered around the edge of the shelf. Then came a sharp crack, like a whip, and the boy stiffened beside him. "Did you hear that?" he asked breathlessly. Before Charles could answer, shadows loomed in the corridor. He jerked back, fear coursing through him like ice. The men from below had found their way up. "We have to get out of here," he whispered fiercely, pulse racing. Suddenly, the boy grabbed his sleeve, eyes wide. "Look!" He pointed beyond the shadows. A group of men, hard faces, weapons drawn, jogged past their hiding spot, barking commands at each other. "He is here somewhere. Still on the property," one shouted, voice rising with urgency, heart racing. Charles felt the weight of the world crash down. Those men were like predators, and they were circling in for the kill. "What if they find us?" he whispered, his throat feeling tight. "We need to move," the boy urged, determination in his eyes. "There is another way out. My uncle used to tell me stories about tunnels beneath this place." The urgency surged as they crept through the shadows, hearts pounding in unison. They navigated quickly, lurking around corners, avoiding any creaks in the old floor. But the rumble echoed again, louder this time, shaking the walls. Just as they reached the end of the corridor, a heavy slam resonated down the way. "Stop right there!" a voice growled from behind them. Charles's breath caught in his throat. They were trapped. "Go!" the boy shouted, shoving Charles forward into the darkness. The hallway narrowed, leading to a door at the end. "Wait!" Charles screamed, but the boy pressed on, the sound of heavy boots closing in behind them. That door could lead to freedom or a deadly confrontation. As they reached for the handle, what lay beyond could change everything. Would they escape the hunting pack or face their greatest nightmare? The uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud, dark and heavy, ready to unleash its fury. The door felt cold against Charles's palm as they reached it. "On three," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. The boy nodded, his eyes locked on the handle, trembling with anticipation. 1, 2, 3. With a firm push, they burst through the door and into a narrow passageway that plunged into darkness. It was a stark contrast to the flickering lights they'd just escaped. They were surrounded by silence, save for their heavy, ragged breaths. "Which way?" Charles asked, adrenaline making his heart race. "I don't know," the boy replied, glancing around. "Just keep moving." They shuffled forward, feeling the chill of the air seep into their bones. The wooden beams overhead creaked ominously, threatening to cave in at any moment. Charles strained to listen for footsteps, muttering a prayer that they hadn't been followed. A glint caught the corner of the boy's eye. "There!" He pointed toward a small opening on the left, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Without questioning it, they slipped into the crevice. It opened into a cramped space, hidden among stacks of crates. The boy peeked outside. "I think we're safe for now." Charles slumped against the wall, heart pounding in his ears. "What now? We can't just wait here. We need to find a way out of this place," the boy said, determination igniting in his voice. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the corridor they had just fled, making them both jump. It was followed by hurried footsteps, heavy and frantic. "Search every room. He can't have gone far." A voice barked, brushing dangerously close to their hiding place. Charles felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. "We need to do something." The boy stood, resolve etched on his face. "Remember the tunnels? There has to be a way down here." He began rummaging through the crates. Charles joined him, rooting through debris and the grime of years. The air felt thick with anticipation. They needed a miracle. "Over here!" the boy exclaimed, revealing a loose board on the floor. It shifted with a low groan, and they both knew this could be their escape. As they pried it open, a musty smell wafted up from the darkness below. Charles hesitated. What if it leads nowhere? What if? But the boy already lowered himself into the hole. "We have to try." With little choice, Charles followed, squeezing through the gap into the deep chill below. They landed with a soft thud in a narrow tunnel, crawling on hands and knees as the dim light from above faded away. The rumble echoed again from above, the sound of angry men searching. "Please hurry!" Charles gasped, his pulse echoing between his ears. The boy pressed onward, leading the way through winding turns. "There has to be an exit somewhere," he murmured, his breath fogging in the cold air. They rounded another bend, and the walls began to close in until they found themselves at a junction. "Which way?" the boy asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. Before Charles could respond, a gasp echoed through the tunnel behind them. The men were closer now, voices growing louder. "He went this way, I swear." "Run!" Charles shouted, grabbing the boy's arm, and they plunged down the path to the left, desperation drawing them deeper into the unknown. The passage was narrow, their shoulders brushing against the rough stone walls as they flew forward, fear driving them like a comet hurtling through the blackness. They skidded to a stop as the passage ahead opened wide into what looked like an underground chamber. Flickering lights illuminated the walls, revealing crude drawings etched into the stone. But something else caught their eyes, a set of rusty metal bars blocking one side, and beyond it, a faint sliver of light. That was it. Their chance at freedom. "Help me with this," Charles urged, shoving against the bars, but they wouldn't budge. Just then, footsteps echoed from behind them, and cold dread pooled in his stomach. "Light, over there!" the boy yelled, pointing at the glimmer beyond the bars. But would they reach it before the hunters caught up? The weight of the world pressed down upon them as the shadows closed in. Once again, would they escape to the light or be swallowed by the darkness? The choices ahead were becoming narrower by the second. The cold metal bars felt unforgiving under Charles's frantic hands. He shoved harder, muscles straining against the rust, but the door wouldn't budge. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his heart raced. Time was slipping through his fingers. The boy stood a short distance away, eyes wide with fear, as echoes of approaching footsteps grew louder. "They're coming!" he hissed, backing away from the entryway. "We have to think fast." Charles looked around, panic rising. The chamber was dimly lit, almost like a crypt, and the drawings on the walls seemed to watch him, ancient faces etched in stone, warning him of the lurking danger. "There must be a way around, a way to the other side," he said, breathless and desperate. "Or maybe something to break the bars?" the boy suggested, his eyes darting across the room. They searched the chamber, adrenaline pouring into their veins. Charles spotted a nearby crate, half-rotted but sturdy enough. "Help me with that." Without waiting for an answer, he sprinted to the crate, dragging it toward the bars. The sound of wood scraping against the stone floor cut through the chilling atmosphere. The boy helped push the crate up against the bars, and Charles grabbed a heavy piece of wood from the crate's remains. He raised it high, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. "Get ready to pull!" he shouted. With one eye on the tunnel behind them, he swung down with all the strength he could muster. The wood crashed against the bars, the metal squealing in protest. He swung again, heart pounding, the sound reverberating through the chamber like thunder. He could almost hear the dark figures closing in, their voices harsh and commanding. "Search every corner." "We won't let him slip away." The boy grabbed the wood from Charles's hands, determination flashing in his eyes. "Let me try." He struck the bars, each blow sending vibrations through Charles's body. Charles watched as the boy lost himself in the task, fear pushed aside by raw adrenaline. "Yes. Keep going." With the next strike, the rusted bars finally began to bend, the sound echoing like a victory cry. Charles couldn't help but cheer, but their noise could attract unwanted attention at any second. They had to break free. The bar broke loose with one last powerful hit, and the gap widened just enough for them to slip through. "Now!" Charles shouted, and they wriggled through into the shaft of light beyond. Emerging, they breathed in the fresh air like drowning men surfacing in the water. But the bliss was short-lived. The bright sunlight illuminated a sprawling tunnel that stretched before them, paved with jagged stones. "Where again?" the boy panted, glancing back at the darkening entrance they had escaped. Charles's eyes swept over the tunnel, anxiety gnawing at him. "Right!" he yelled, jerking his head. They hurried forward, feet pounding against the uneven ground, a cacophony against the relentless ghost of their pursuers. "What if they come?" the boy's voice trembled. "They will," Charles said, urgency filling his words. "That's why we have to make it count. Keep moving." As they ran, they heard chaos erupt behind them. Angry voices and shouts filled the air, mingling with the sound of footsteps charging into the chamber they had just fled. It was a race against time now. Each echoing step behind them felt like a countdown. But then they reached a new junction, one that branched off into two different paths. Charles hesitated. "Which way now?" the boy's face scrunched in thought. I don't know." The panic seeped in with the chase still echoing behind them. They had to choose, but what lay down each path? "Take a breath," Charles said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We need a plan. We can't throw ourselves into the unknown. This time, we can't gamble on hope." Their hearts raced in sync as the echo of feet approached closer, the shadows stretching to dance around them, leaving no comforting corners to escape to. "Trust me," the boy finally said, his fingers trembling toward the right path. "We have to trust my gut." Charles looked into his eyes, filled with fear and resolve. A spark of hope ignited in his chest. "Let us do it." As they sprinted down the path, a distant light flickered at the end. Freedom? Or another trap? The darkness behind them thickened, desperate shouts rising, growing frantic. Would they make it to this new light, or would the darkness swallow them whole? As they raced towards the distant light, the air thickened with urgency. Charles's heart hammered against his chest, a drummer in a frantic parade, while the boy kept glancing back, fear dramatically layering his expression. The sound of shouting grew louder, more friction against the urgency of their escape. Faster! Charles urged, pushing himself harder. Each step held the weight of their fate, either salvation or a return to the hell they just escaped. The ground beneath their feet grew uneven, jagged stones threatening to trip them at every turn. "Do you think they saw us?" the boy panted, his small chest heaving. "Doesn't matter. Keep going," Charles replied, forcing his legs to move faster even as the fatigue threatened to pull him down. They stumbled on through the tunnel, adrenaline sparking at the idea of what might lie ahead, a way out, opportunity, maybe even fortuitous fate waiting for their arrival. But the dark behind them didn't fade. It was a relentless chase, closing in, inching ever closer as it swallowed the sounds of the world above. Suddenly, the tunnel turned sharply, and the boy nearly collided with the wall. "This way," he shouted, pointing down a narrow, winding path that seemed to snake into further darkness. The flickering light faded with each step into the gloom. "What if it's a dead end?" Charles asked, dread curling in his stomach. "We have to take the risk, it's all we have," the boy insisted, determination shimmering through his fear. Charles felt an unnerving weight in his chest. He hated the idea of trusting something so uncertain, but in the wild gamble of their escape, all options led to this uncertainty. Together, they dashed forward, shadows leaping nearby as if they had more power than just darkness. The walls buzzed with tension, breathing with life in the oppressive silence of the unseen. Then, the boy stopped dead in his tracks, eyes wide, staring into the darkness ahead. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Charles leaned in, straining to listen. At first, it was just the rush of his blood, but then voices. Low, muffled, but unmistakably close. His stomach dropped. "We need to hide, now." Frantically, they searched for cover, slinking behind a crumbling pillar jutting from the wall. They held their breath, the air thick with the tension of what might come next. The muffled voices surged closer, filled with anger and menace. Shadows moved in the dimness, a patrol of intertwined threats passing just feet away. "You think they went this way?" a gruff voice rumbled. "Search the shadows, don't miss anything." Charles felt ice creep into his veins. Their pursuers were relentless, and each second spent hiding felt like a countdown to doom. He could see the boy shaking beside him, holding back tears of terror. "What do we do if they find us?" the boy whispered, eyes glued to the group just beyond their concealment. "We fight," Charles muttered under his breath, knowing full well he was not built for heroics. But desperation has a way of channeling courage from deep within, forcing individuals like him to confront that which terrifies most. And just as the men passed, one turned sharply, casting a glance backward. The light caught his face, and Charles had to bite back a gasp. The man looked familiar, his hard features like a twisted mirror reflecting all the times Charles had been too close to danger, too naive, too trusting. "That guy," the boy started, but went quiet as the man locked eyes with them briefly. Then, there was a loud crash from the opposite end of the tunnel, a sound thunderous enough to shake the ground. Without warning, chaos erupted, voices crescendoing into a frenzied storm. "Run!" Charles barked. They bolted from their hiding spot, adrenaline propelling them forward as the world erupted around them with shouts and confusion. As they sprinted, they left the clutches of the shadows behind only to blast into a vast chamber illuminated by flickering torches. And there, amidst a gathering of figures in expensive suits and angry eyes, stood answers to questions they hadn't even thought to ask. "Stop them!" A voice roared, sending chills down Charles's spine, memories igniting at the recognition of that authoritative tone. Where should they go now? The walls of the chamber seemed to close in. Another choice loomed ahead between confrontation and flight. Would the light lead them to freedom, or seal their fate? The tension in the chamber felt like a heavy weight, pressing against Charles's chest as he skidded to a halt. The figures in suits turned their fierce gazes upon him and the boy, a mix of confusion and anger flickering across their faces. In that instant, fear collided with anger and disbelief as they processed the sight of two unexpected intruders. Where did they come from? One of them called out, incredulous. "We're not here to cause trouble." Charles shouted, though his voice trembled, uncertainty creeping back in. He felt a protective instinct swell within him towards the boy, who was trembling beside him, his face pale yet desperate. "Just give us a chance to explain," the boy cried out, stepping forward instinctively. The audacity of his bravery struck Charles, tinged with a vulnerability that was both awe-inspiring and concerning. The boyish innocence glimmered against the backdrop of danger, but just as he opened his mouth to speak, a sharp laugh cut through the tension, slicing the atmosphere like a knife. The figure at the center, a man with slicked back hair and an air of arrogance, stepped closer, his gaze leveled at them both. "You think you can just walk in here and make demands? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Charles felt the cold grasp of fear coil around him again. How had they stumbled into this labyrinth of power, one that extended beyond the streets and shadows? He looked at the boy, and their eyes locked for a moment, a silent agreement. Together, they had to find a way out of this. "We're not here to fight," Charles answered, his voice steadying as he took a calculated step toward the man. "We just want to leave. We were chased by enough." The man roared, cutting him off. "This isn't a game. You can't run forever. You think we don't know about your little escapade? Everything has been monitored." The laughter that followed shot through Charles like ice. They had indeed fallen farther than they imagined to. In that moment, the boyish shoulders slumped, all the bravery draining away, replaced by visible despair. There was no more pretense, no more hope left in their situation. But then something shifted, a light sparked in the boyish eyes, as if memories pushed through the mental fog of fear. You know who I am," he stated, disconcerting the man. The atmosphere stumbled for a heartbeat as the man narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" "This tattoo." The boy raised his arm, displaying the insignia, a crest that spoke of family and danger. "I'm not just anyone. I'm part of this world, and if you try to hurt me, you know my family will retaliate." "You're making a mistake." Charles felt as if the ground had opened beneath him. Everything they had encountered began to swirl together. The boy belonged to this dark play, caught in a web they hadn't seen. Now uncertainty clashed with self-preservation, rattling his heart. Would this give them leverage, or would this revelation put them in even greater peril? The man's expression shifted, merging anger and thought. "Your family?" He scoffed, but the softened undertone was unmistakable. "You have no power here. But maybe you aren't entirely worthless after all." Charles seized the moment. "Look, we're just kids at the mercy of a world we didn't understand. Let us go, it was a mistake." "So you ran because you were scared?" The man tilted his head, measuring them. "And what power do you think your family holds? You're as good as dead without the right backing." The boy clenched his fist, old fear boiling into visible rage. "I may not have the power now, but I will not let you dictate my life. I'm choosing to escape this nightmare." His courage resonated. Charles felt the swell of determination thrumming from within. "They won't back down. Not like this. And whatever happens next, we'll find a way out," he muttered under his breath, echoing the boyish rush of resilience. The man seemed to ponder, his gaze drifting from one boy to the other, uncertainty weaving through his hardened mask. "You really think you can run from me? You don't get to choose freedom. This world isn't that simple." "But maybe, just maybe." Before he could finish, security thudded against the chamber door, urgent voices crashing in like thunder. As chaos erupted again, confusion rippling through everyone present, the moment in the spotlight shattered. "Get them!" someone cried, and the sharp jolt of adrenaline kicked in. Charles grasped the boy's arm, eyes widening. "This is our chance," he shouted, adrenaline surging as the tumult erupted around them. They bolted toward a side exit, the metal rattling against the pressure of rushing bodies. They fought through the chaos, a whirlwind of flying papers, shouting, and chaos charging into the uncertain shadows. They burst through a door, colliding with fresh air outside onto the street, the night alive with rain and the remnants of the storm. "Run!" the boy shouted, pulling Charles forward as they dashed into the wet streets, the pounding rain washing over them and drowning their fears. Laughter, disbelief, and terror swirled in their minds as they sprinted into the unknown. Each pounding heartbeat ignited a flicker of hope, an existence found in breaking free from the chains that had bound them. Together, they surged forward, adrenaline guiding their path toward an uncertain freedom. No longer just a millionaire or a lost boy, they surged into the night as two souls united against the storm of friendship blossoming against danger, both propelled by the promise of new beginnings and the truth that real freedom is for those who dare to fight for it. As they rounded the corner, a shared smile flickered between them, growing into a promise of resilience, their journey just beginning on the other side of the darkness. And as they ran into the future, uncertainty surging forward like a gust of wind, Charles couldn't help but think this tale would not end here. You need to subscribe now for more moments like this, because you don't want to miss out on any twists the next story brings. Smash that like button now. Each click fuels our journey and combats the algorithm. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories, we want to hear from you. And for your friends who need to see this conclusion, do not wait even one more second to share. Your support makes all the difference.